It's words about other words. It's a podcast.
Hey, we're the Word Nerds. This is our Eco edition where we're all about words that begin with eco.
Words, nerds, together at last. Hi, I'm Marlene. In this episode, we're talking about Ecocide and Ecogrief, two sides of the same coin. Merriam-Webster defines ecocide as the destruction of large areas of the natural environment as a consequence of human activity. We don't really need a dictionary, I guess, to tell us what it means. Ecocide. We know eco means life and side, that's death. Ecocide is the killing of life in a big, on-purpose way. It's related to genocide. Not just a little bit of killing, mass destruction, with the intent not just to destroy life, but to destroy ways of life. It's deliberate. Or maybe it doesn't have to be. Ecocide is the bison bones in the prairie dirt we stand on. Here, in Treaty 6 territory, it's buffalo bones piled so high they blot out the sun. It's men with rifles laughing together as they lean out of train cars to shoot them en masse until it seemed that they had got every single last one. I wasn't there, but I imagine there was laughing. I imagine there was backslapping. Ecocide is Chernobyl. It's contaminated mother's milk and generations of strange new cancers. Ecocide is the razing of the Amazon rainforest. It's the disappearance of one-of-a-kind medicinal plants, and it's the silence of songbirds. Is it Exxon executives knowing in the 1980s about climate change and the risks of rising CO2 in the atmosphere? Is it they're discussing what to do about it and choosing to spend PR money on publicly denying its reality and legal funds fighting environmental regulations while simultaneously taking measurements and shoring up their own infrastructure against rising sea levels and melting Arctic permafrost? Is it Shell and Mobil doing the same thing? Or does the indifference of these companies to suffering, their real purpose being just to get filthy rich, not to get filthy? Does it count as ecocide then? If someone just doesn't care if your and my children's children die of a rare cancer, or not cozy in bed surrounded by people who love them, but while choking on wildfire smoke, starving in a mudslide, is it ecocide then? If they're just like, I didn't mean to kill every earthling, I just wanted another $1 billion? The first usage of ecocide recorded by etymologists in the Oxford English Dictionary is in an Ohio newspaper, the Sandusky Register, in 1969. The entry reads, O'Keefe said neglect of the pollution problem could be described as ecocide, crimes against humanity by destruction of the environment. Tanya Stiles, Oxford English Dictionary editor, says, as combining forms go, eco is an extremely productive one. The OED covers almost 100 words formed from it, dating back to the early 20th century, and new combinations are appearing all the time. Words beginning with the prefix eco first began popping up in the 1960s because people were talking about the environment then. The side suffix is much older. There are the biblical sides like patricide and fratricide, and there are much newer sides too: pesticide, insecticide, fungicide. Ecocide was used again in the 80s to describe what America did with napalm, the Vietnam War, and usage has proliferated since then. It may not be fair to call ecocide new because there are well-documented cases of scorched earth warfare in ancient times, poisoning wells, burning fields, sowing weeds. It does seem a matter of scale and scope, though. Poisoning wells is different from poisoning every drop of water. The Guardian has published a list of the 10 worst ecocides. It's like a top 10 summer bucket list on BuzzFeed, only completely different. The Guardian includes floating rafts of plastic in the oceans as ecocide and space junk as ecocide. They point to the Athabasca tar sands and the tailings ponds there. 20th and 21st century humans have been coming up with so many innovative ways to ecocide. Who is to blame for ecocide? Everybody. Nobody. Same thing. Ecocide is not actually considered a crime, so literally nobody. The international courts recognize war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, but not ecocide. Not yet, anyway. We're not supposed to get eco-angry about this. Eco-warriors are the worst. Being sad about it is a choice. And why choose to be sad about dead bison herds and oil-poisoned deltas when there is Skip the Dishes and there's Netflix? But I am sad about it.
You're sad about it, I'm sad about it, so are a lot of people, and there is a term for this, and it is our next word, ecogrief, also known as ecological grief or climate grief. It is that gut-wrenching feeling many of us have when we're hearing about the permanent damages being done to Earth's ecosystems, the out-of-control wildfires, flooding, and hurricanes that have devastated communities worldwide, and how CO2 emissions continue to be belched into the atmosphere, raising global temperatures and closing the walls in on all of us as our planet steadily becomes uninhabitable. Yeah, that feeling. You know the one. There's also another interesting word for this feeling, called solastalgia. It was coined by philosopher Glenn Albrecht. He combined two Latin words, solacium, meaning comfort, and algia, meaning pain, comfort pain. So the world that we live in, Earth, which should be somewhere we feel perfectly comfortable in, is now permanently affixed with this feeling of discomfort. And though it goes by more than one name, it was really Aldo Leopold, an American naturalist, who first spoke about this emotional impact we feel when we hear about the harm being done to nature. He talked about it all the way back in 1949 in his book, A Sand County Almanac. He wrote that one of the penalties of ecological education is to live alone in a world of wounds. Now, the word grief comes from an old Anglo-French word, gref, which meant injustice or calamity, and it has its origins in the Latin word grevis, which meant heavy or serious. And as we know, grief comes in 5 stages: denial, bargaining, anger, depression, and acceptance. Of course, these are the psychological processes of mourning, and scientists are discovering that people are internalizing what's happening to our environment in a similar way. The American Psychological Association has found that eco-grief can cause depression, substance abuse, PTSD, and feelings of helplessness. It can even put strains on social relationships, and furthermore, the stress we feel induced by the ravages of climate change can also cause changes to patterns of sleep, eating, or exercise, and affect the human immune system, causing ailments to physical health as well. However, the APA has found ways of soothing ecological grief, which involves discussing and learning about the effects of climate change with others and finding practical solutions. These help build emotional resiliency and promote activities which reduce the effects of eco-grief. Now, this condition is especially prevalent among younger generations, who are uncertain of what will become of their world as they grow older in it and what challenges they'll be faced with. What careers should they build? Should they start a family? Is it even worth saving for retirement? How can they answer these questions when faced with oncoming climate catastrophe? Though ecogrief is just the internal processing of what's happening in our world, whatever stage of grief we find ourselves at, it is important that despair doesn't take us over. After all, acceptance is the culmination of grief, and acknowledging the problem is the first step to solving it. As Mel Robbins asks, what if it all works out? So let's be hopeful, and remember that actively solving the problem of climate change together is what will help us reduce these feelings of grief. In an interview with The Guardian, Dr. Steve Simpson, a professor of marine biology and global change at the University of Exeter, gave this advice to those experiencing ecogrief. Quote, "It's really important to find ways of communicating the grief that we're feeling and work together to support each other. Then we can become stronger. We can start to develop the science that takes our knowledge and turns it on its head, turns it into a solution, rather than just a negative story. I think that finding any way of fostering a love of the natural world in the next generation is critical for them to be part of the solution." End quote. And that's all from this episode of Word Nerds Eco Edition. Please join us in our next episode, where we will be looking at the words eco-anxiety and eco-terrorism.